Hello and welcome to my channel. Here I tell interesting stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
Before I begin, look at this rock. Just look at it. A granite cliff jutting out of the water in the middle of a bay, like a giant's fist punched through the earth's crust. No land in sight. Just grey sky, grey water, and this monster of stone, crowned by a golden archangel. You might ask, who on earth thought to build here? That is exactly the right question. And the answer begins not with an architect, not with a king, and not even with the Pope. It begins with a single dream. Let me first tell you about the place itself, because without that, the whole story loses its meaning. Mont Saint-Michel sits in the Bay of Saint-Malo, on the border between Normandy and Brittany. And this is not simply a pretty postcard view. This is one of the most geologically strange places in all of Europe. Imagine, twice a day, the sea here retreats 15 kilometers. 15. Vast stretches of the bay are laid bare, and before you spreads an endless desert of wet sand and silt. The rock stands in the middle of this desert like a solitary sentinel. And then the tide comes back. This is where, pay attention, the real wonder and the real terror begin simultaneously. The water in this bay moves at speeds of up to 6 meters per second, faster than the average person can run. The locals say the tide comes in at the speed of a galloping horse. And that is not a metaphor. That is physics. People drowned here by the hundreds. Pilgrims who tried to walk to the rock across the exposed seabed couldn't make it back in time. The water caught them before they reached safety. Bodies were found in the mud, sometimes days later, sometimes never. A terrifying place? Yes. But for exactly that reason, a sacred one. In the minds of early medieval people, the boundary between life and death was the boundary between the world of men and the world of God. And this place, where the sea could turn solid ground into a deadly trap within minutes, this was, in their deep conviction, the threshold of another world. The Celts knew this long before the Christians arrived. They called the rock the tomb in the sea, Doldemons, and believed it to be the place where the dead waited for their passage into the afterlife. According to their beliefs, fishermen sometimes heard voices coming from the rock at night, voices of those who had not yet fully departed. The Christians came later, but they chose the same place. The year is 708 AD. Avranches, a small town on the shore. The bishop serving here is a man named Aubert. By all accounts, this was a careful, practical, and slightly unremarkable man. Precisely the kind of person a good bishop of a provincial town ought to be. He kept records, managed church property, settled disputes among parishioners. And then this man, careful, practical, slightly unremarkable, was visited 3 times by the Archangel Michael. The first time, Aubert decided it was simply a dream. Too much wine at dinner? It happens. The second time, harder to explain away. The Archangel was the same. The words were the same. Build a church on the rock in the bay, there where the sea is, there where the boundary lies. Aubert prayed and tried to forget. The third time, Michael, according to legend, ran out of patience. He appeared to the bishop and pressed his finger against Aubert's head with such force that, according to the tradition, a mark was left on Aubert's skull, an indentation made by the Archangel's finger. And here the story stops being merely a beautiful legend, because the skull of Bishop Aubert is still kept to this day in the Basilica of Avranches, and there is indeed a hole in it. Medical experts say trepanation or trauma. The church says the finger of God. I say this. Either way, It was after this third vision that Aubert woke up and began to act. But wait, why specifically a rock in a bay? The Archangel Michael is one of the most important archangels in the Christian tradition. He is the warrior, the defeater of the devil, the guardian of heaven's gates. He was venerated across all of Europe. And here is an interesting detail that tour guides rarely mention. At that time, a wave of construction of shrines dedicated to the Archangel Michael was sweeping across Western Europe. In Italy, Monte Gargano. In England, St. Michael's Mount. All of these places shared one thing: rocks above water. Researchers have asked, is this a coincidence? Some historians put forward the hypothesis that early Christians deliberately chose sites of Celtic and pagan sanctuaries in order to reinterpret their power, to take what was already considered sacred in people's living memory and consecrate it anew. The rock in the Bay of Saint-Malo was such a place. People already feared it, already respected it, already believed that something greater existed there. Aubert only needed to give it a name. And he did. The year 709. Aubert sends a delegation to Monte Gargano in Italy, to the greatest shrine of the Archangel Michael, to bring back a relic, a piece of crimson cloth and a fragment of the altar that the Archangel himself was said to have touched. This mattered enormously. In the Middle Ages, no serious church was built without a relic. A relic was not merely a symbol, it was a guarantee of the saint's presence. Without one, a building remained just a building. The relic was brought back. And then, according to legend, another miracle occurred. At the summit of the rock, they found a sleeping bull, enormous, white, clearly domesticated, but with no explanation for how it came to be on a sheer granite rock in the middle of a tidal bay. Around the bull lay a circle of human footprints, though no one had climbed the rock. Aubert took this as a sign. Here is the boundary of the first church, exactly along the footprints. That is the perimeter of the walls. The bull, according to the same legend, calmly walked away on its own, straight into the water, and disappeared. The builders watched it go. Then they picked up their tools and began. But here is what matters. In the Middle Ages, the line between fact and miracle did not exist the way we draw it today. If a man genuinely believed that an archangel had appeared to him, for him and for his contemporaries, this was just as real an event as building a wall or the birth of a child. It was this faith, not merely a legend, not merely a pretty story. It was this faith that lifted millions of tons of stone onto a sheer rock above a deadly bay. And that is exactly what our next chapter is about. The morning after Aubert finally understood, he walked to the window of his chamber in Avranches and looked out toward the bay. He had looked at this view 1,000 times. The flat grey water, the tidal flats stretching to the horizon, the small dark shape of the rock rising from the middle of everything like a thought that refused to go away. But this morning it looked different, not because anything had changed out there. The rock was exactly what it had always been. A granite intrusion forced up through the seabed by geological violence so ancient it had no name. Approximately 70 meters of compressed time rising from water and sand. What had changed was the man looking at it. He raised his hand and pressed his fingers against the center of his forehead. There was no wound, no mark visible to anyone else. But beneath the bone, in some place that was not quite physical, something had been rearranged, like furniture moved in a dark room. Everything still there, but nothing where it had been. He turned from the window and began to write. The first letter went to Rome. It was careful, precise, and almost certainly deeply alarming to whoever read it in the papal offices. A bishop in northwestern Francia was reporting a divine visitation 3 times. The Archangel Michael in person, a command to build a sanctuary on a tidal rock in the middle of a notoriously dangerous bay. He described the 3rd visit with particular care: the finger, the light, the sensation of something being permanently decided inside his skull. He did not mention that he had needed 3 visits to be convinced. That detail, he felt, did not reflect well on him. The reply from Rome, when it eventually came, was cautious but not dismissive. The cult of Saint Michael was growing across Christendom. Monte Gargano in southern Italy had been a place of miraculous visitation since 490. There was precedent. There was, in the careful language of the Church, no immediate theological objection. Aubert read this twice and decided it meant yes. He sent 2 monks south to Monte Gargano first. Their names were Benoit and Aldrich. They were young, Benoit barely 20, Aldrich perhaps 23, and neither of them had ever traveled further than a day's walk from Avranches. The journey to southern Italy on foot and by occasional boat would take them the better part of 3 months in each direction. Aubert gave them a letter of introduction, a small purse of silver, and a wooden walking staff each. Then he stood at the gates of Avranches and watched them walk south until the road bent around a hill and took them out of sight. He would not see Benoit again for 8 months. He would not see Aldrich again at all. What happened to Aldrich is not recorded. This is itself a kind of historical statement. Countless people disappeared on medieval roads, to bandits, to illness, to rivers, to the simple bad luck of being alive in a violent and unpredictable century. The Church kept records of saints and bishops and the decisions of councils. It did not keep records of young monks who set out on long journeys and failed to return. Aldrich walked south from Avranches in the summer of 708 and stepped out of history somewhere between here and there. His name survives only because Benoit mentioned him once in a document that itself survives only in a 12th century copy of a copy. My companion Aldrich, who did not complete the journey. 6 words, a whole life compressed into the past tense. Benoit reached Monte Gargano in late autumn. He had walked across Francia, crossed the Alps in the last weeks before the passes closed, moved down through the Italian peninsula, turned east toward the Adriatic coast, and finally arrived at the limestone cliffs of the Gargano promontory, with worn-through sandals, a beard he hadn't had when he started, and a set of experiences he would spend the rest of his life trying to process. The sanctuary at Monte Gargano was already more than 200 years old by the time Benoit arrived. According to tradition, the Archangel Michael had appeared there in 490, leaving an imprint of his foot in the stone and filling a cave with supernatural light. The cave had become a church. The church had become a pilgrimage destination. The pilgrimage destination had become a small but significant node in the network of sacred geography that Christians were quietly laying across the surface of Europe. The monks at Monte Gargano received Benoit with the careful hospitality that was a monastic obligation regardless of how surprised they might have been by his appearance. He was fed. He was given clean clothes. He slept for 2 days. Then he explained why he had come. The abbot at Monte Gargano was a man named Grimwald. He was, by all accounts, someone who had spent 40 years in proximity to the miraculous and had emerged from the experience not credulous, but exacting. He listened to Benoit's account of Aubert's visions with the expression of a man mentally checking each detail against an internal catalogue of genuine and fraudulent divine interventions. He asked questions. How many times had the Archangel appeared? 3. Had there been physical evidence? The mark on the skull? Yes. Had anyone else witnessed the visitation? No, the bishop had been alone. Had the bishop sought the experience or been subject to it involuntarily? Involuntarily, he had initially ignored it twice. This last detail seemed to satisfy Grimwald in some particular way. A man who ignores an angel twice, he said, is probably not inventing the third visit. He agreed to provide relics. The relics were prepared with ceremony and precision. A fragment of the stone altar from inside the Gargano cave. Dark gray limestone, rough-edged, the size of a large coin. A piece of crimson cloth that had reportedly been left by the Archangel himself during the original apparition, now so old that it was more the memory of cloth than cloth itself, kept between layers of clean linen inside a sealed silver box. These were placed together in a carved wooden reliquary box, sealed with wax stamped with Grimwald's seal, and given to Benoit with explicit instructions about how they were to be handled. With clean hands, with prayer before touching, never on the ground, never left unattended. Benoit carried these instructions and the box back across Italy, across the Alps in early spring when the passes were barely open, across Francia, and into Avranches 8 months after he had left. He arrived at dawn, alone, on foot, slightly frostbitten, and placed the sealed box in Aubert's hands without speaking. Aubert held it for a long time before he opened it. Building on Mont Saint-Michel was, from the very first day, an argument with physics. The rock was not designed for construction. It had not been formed with any consideration for the needs of human beings who might later want to place heavy stone structures on its summit. It was a mass of granite pushed up at angles, uneven, harder than iron in some places, threaded with fracture lines in others, its summit barely large enough to stand on, let alone build on, its sides falling away in sheer drops to a bay that was actively trying to reclaim it twice a day. The first builders arrived in the spring of 709 with tools, optimism, and a complete absence of appreciation for what they were attempting. They were not professional architects. There were no professional architects in the modern sense, men trained specifically in the engineering of large stone structures. There were experienced builders, men who had worked on churches and fortifications elsewhere, who understood the principles of how stone sat on stone and what happened when it did not sit correctly. Aubert hired the best he could find and brought them to the summit of his impossible rock. The lead builder was a man named Gervais. He stood on the summit on the first morning, looked around at the bare granite dropping away in every direction, looked at the rough plans Aubert had sketched, looked at the pile of tools and cut stone waiting below, and said nothing for a very long time. Then he said, "We'll need to cut into the rock itself." Aubert said, "Whatever you need." Gervais said, "More time than you probably want to hear about." The first problem was the summit itself. It was not flat. It was not remotely flat. It was a series of granite ridges and depressions running roughly north to south, with the highest point, where the chapel needed to be, actually slightly off-center and sitting above a network of subsurface fractures that a careful inspection revealed to Gervais with growing professional alarm. He spent 3 days on the summit before a single stone was moved, pressing his hands against the rock, striking it with a small hammer and listening to the sound, kneeling and putting his ear against the granite as if hearing a heartbeat. The rock, he concluded, was not going to cooperate, but could be made to tolerate. They began cutting. The sound of iron on granite rang across the bay for months. In the fishing villages on the mainland shore, people heard it at dawn and at dusk, and in the silences between tides. Children grew up with that sound as part of the background noise of their lives, the way some generations grow up with church bells or market criers or the sound of the sea. A generation of children on the Norman and Breton coast grew up with the sound of Mont Saint-Michel being made into something. The pilgrims arrived before the building was finished. This was the detail that surprised Aubert most completely. He had imagined that the sanctuary would be built, and then it would be consecrated, and then word would spread, and then eventually people would come. A sequence, a logical progression. What actually happened was different. People came before there was anything to come to. The first documented pilgrim arrived in the summer of 710. Her name was Ermentrude. She was a woman of perhaps 40 from a village near Rennes, 2 days' walk away. She arrived alone, having walked across the tidal flats at low tide following a route she had been told about by someone who had heard it from someone else, and she climbed the rock and stood in front of the half-built roofless walls of the first chapel and looked at the bare altar stone inside, just a large flat piece of granite sitting on 2 smaller ones, and wept. When Aubert found her there and asked what she wanted, she said she didn't know exactly. She had felt she needed to come. Something had been pulling at her for months, a direction more than a destination, and she had followed it, and it had brought her here. Aubert looked at this woman standing in his unfinished chapel, weeping in front of a granite altar with no roof above it and scaffolding on 3 sides, and understood something he had not fully understood before. The holiness of a place was not something you constructed. You did not build it, and then it became sacred. The sacred was already there, waiting, and the building was just the physical acknowledgement of what the ground already knew about itself. He had been given the task not of creating something, but of recognizing something. By 720, the tally of pilgrims who had made the crossing was into the hundreds. By 730, the thousands. They came from across Francia. They came from the British Isles, crossing the Channel by boat and then walking south. They came from further still, from the Germanic territories, from Italy, from Spain. The pilgrimage routes of medieval Europe were already beginning to form. Those invisible roads made of footsteps and prayer that would eventually connect every sacred site on the continent in a web of human longing. Mont Saint-Michel, despite being barely 20 years old as a pilgrimage site, inserted itself into this network with remarkable speed. This was partly because of the Archangel. Michael was becoming one of the most significant figures in Christian devotion, protector against evil, guide of souls, general of heaven's armies. A site dedicated to him carried immediate weight, but it was also partly because of the bay itself, the danger of the crossing, the tides, the quicksand, the distance, the unpredictability of the weather was not a deterrent. It was an attraction. The pilgrimage was supposed to be difficult. That was the point. You were supposed to arrive changed by the journey, not just transported by it. The bay gave every pilgrim the possibility of death, and in that possibility, the crossing became something more than a walk. Not everyone made it. The bay took people every year, sometimes in 1s and 2s. A pilgrim who misjudged the tide, who stepped into a channel of quicksand, who was caught by the returning water too far from either shore. sometimes in larger numbers when a group decided to cross in conditions that looked manageable until they suddenly were not. The monks who lived on the rock became, by necessity, experts in the bay. They learned the tides with the precision that in another age would have been applied to mathematical tables. They learned the channels, the quicksand zones, the places where the sand was solid, and the places where it would open beneath a man's foot like a mouth. They developed a system of guides, local men from the mainland villages who knew the bay the way the monks knew their scriptures, from years of close attention and the particular education that came from being wrong about it once and surviving. The guides walked ahead of pilgrim groups with long wooden poles, testing the sand before each step. Even so, even with all of this, the bay took people. Their names are mostly gone. A few appear in monastic records as footnotes to other events. On this day, 3 pilgrims drowned in the crossing, requiescent in pace, the Latin abbreviation of a prayer that took less time to write than the lives it was appended to. The bay kept its dead. In 933, a Norman duke named Guillaume Longue-Épée, William Longsword, a man whose nickname tells you something about his priorities, incorporated the Mont Saint-Michel peninsula into the Duchy of Normandy. This was significant for reasons that were not immediately obvious. The Normans were, by this point, only about 2 generations removed from being Vikings. Their great-grandfather Rollo had arrived on the French coast in the late 9th century, not as a settler, but as a raider, a tall, dangerous man from the north who had eventually been given land by a Frankish king who had decided that paying the Vikings to stop was more efficient than fighting them indefinitely. Rollo had converted to Christianity. His people had intermarried with the local Frankish and Breton populations, and within a century, the descendants of Norse raiders were one of the most intensely ambitious and organizationally gifted peoples in Europe. They were also enthusiastic builders. The change at Mont Saint-Michel came in 966, when Duke Richard I of Normandy, grandson of William Longsword, replaced the small community of Celtic monks who had been living on the rock since Aubert's time with a community of Benedictines. This was not a gentle transition. The Celtic monks had been there for 2.5 centuries. Their tradition was older than the Norman presence in Francia, older than the Carolingian Empire, reaching back to the Irish and British monasticism of the 5th and 6th centuries. A tradition of wandering scholar monks, of learning and illumination, and a kind of Christianity that was more mystical and less institutional than what Rome preferred. The Benedictines were Roman. They were organized. They had a rule, the Rule of Saint Benedict, a precise document governing every hour of every day in a monastery, from the time of rising to the time of sleeping, from the portions of food to the schedule of prayer. The Celtic monks had no rule. They had habit, tradition, the accumulated practice of generations, and a relationship with the specific place they inhabited that was very difficult to document, but very real. When the Benedictines arrived, the Celtic monks left. Where they went is not recorded. What the Benedictines brought with them, more valuable than anything else, was ambition, not personal ambition. The rule was quite clear about the spiritual dangers of that. Institutional ambition, the ambition of an organization that had been thinking about how to build the kingdom of God on earth for 4 centuries, and had very specific ideas about what it should look like. It should look like Mont Saint-Michel. The new abbot, a man named Maynard, arrived at the rock in 966 and spent his first 3 days simply walking. Around the base, up the paths, across the summit. He looked at the existing buildings, the small church, the outbuildings, the rudimentary defenses, with the expression of a man looking at rough material that he intended to transform completely. He began drawing plans immediately. The building that Maynard and his successors envisioned was not modest. It could not be modest. The location demanded scale. You did not sit a small building on top of a 70-meter granite rock in the middle of a famous bay and expect it to make a coherent statement. The rock itself was an exclamation point. The building had to be commensurate. What they planned, what was slowly, painfully, expensively realized over the next 3 centuries, was one of the most audacious architectural projects in medieval Europe. The problem was the rock. The summit was not large enough. Any building of sufficient scale would immediately run out of summit and begin to cantilever over nothing. The solution, and it is the solution that makes Mont Saint-Michel architecturally unique, was to build the mountain itself up, to construct enormous stone platforms on the sides of the rock, great crypts and undercrofts, and supporting structures built directly against and into the granite, creating artificial ground where there was none, raising the effective summit area until it was large enough to support what needed to be built on it. The Abbey Church did not sit on the rock. The Abbey Church sat on top of a building that sat on top of another building that sat on top of the rock. This is still astonishing to grasp when you stand inside it. Construction consumed generations. The Romanesque nave was begun in 1017 under Abbot Hildebert II, using stone quarried from the rock itself and from the mainland, hauled up in an engineering operation of considerable complexity. The builders worked at heights that would make a modern construction worker's safety inspector resign. They worked in Atlantic weather. The wind at the summit could knock a man off his feet in winter, and it did. And men fell. The records are sparse on deaths. The records are always sparse on deaths when the deaths are of workers rather than patrons. What the records preserve is the stone. In 1203, King Philippe Auguste of France set fire to the town at the base of the rock. He was not attacking the abbey. He was attacking the forces of John of England, King John, the unlucky Plantagenet, the man who would within a decade be forced to sign Magna Carta, and who was at this moment losing Normandy to the French crown in a military campaign that was going very badly for him. The soldiers sheltering at the base of Mont Saint-Michel were English allied Normans. Philippe's forces set fire to the town to drive them out. The fire spread faster than anyone intended. It reached the abbey. 3 of the buildings on the north face were destroyed. Manuscripts burned. The work of decades turned to ash in an afternoon. Monks stood at the upper windows watching the fire consume what generations had built, and there was nothing to do but watch. Philippe Auguste felt guilty. This is documented. He felt guilty in the particular way that medieval kings felt guilty about religious damage, urgently and expensively. As penance and reparation, he provided substantial funds for rebuilding. What was built with those funds was La Merveille. La Merveille. The marvel is the name given to the great double building constructed on the north face of the rock between 1211 and 1228. It is 6 stories of Gothic architecture rising directly from the granite cliff face. 2 complete buildings stacked side by side and on top of each other, each floor serving a different function in the organized hierarchy of monastic life. At the bottom, the almonry and cellar. Above, the great hall for guests and the knight's hall. Above that, the refectory and scriptorium. And at the very top, the cloister. The cloister is at the summit. This is intentional and significant. In most monasteries, the cloister is at ground level, a garden in the center of the building complex, a place of meditation and movement, and the daily hours of walking prayer. At Mont Saint-Michel, the cloister is at the top of the building, surrounded on all sides by open sky and the distant views of the bay, suspended between the abbey below and the heaven above. It is one of the most extraordinary spaces in medieval architecture. Slender double columns of pale pink limestone support pointed arches that frame views of nothing but sky and water. The garden in the center is improbably green, roses growing in the salt wind, stubbornly alive against all reasonable expectation. Monks walked here for their hours of meditation. They walked in a square, around and around, the columns clicking past, the sky and sea visible in the arches, the sound of the wind and distant water, the only sound. What they thought about while they walked is not recorded. By the 14th century, Mont Saint-Michel was one of the most visited pilgrimage sites in Europe. It had a village, a market, inns for pilgrims of different financial means, shops selling relics, genuine and otherwise, and small metal badges stamped with the image of the Archangel that pilgrims bought and wore as proof of completion, the medieval equivalent of a stamp in a passport. It had a prison. This detail surprises people. By the 15th century, the French crown had decided that a nearly impregnable fortified rock in the middle of a dangerous bay was a useful place to keep people who needed keeping. A cage was installed in the lower levels. Various unfortunate individuals spent years in it. The combination of extreme isolation, the sound of the tides, and the particular damp cold of the lower rock made it an effective, if brutal, place of confinement. The monks continued their hours of prayer above. The prisoners continued their hours of darkness below. The rock held both of them equally. The 100 Years' War barely touched Mont Saint-Michel. This is remarkable given that everything around it was consumed by that long catastrophe. The English and French tearing Western France apart for 4 generations, burning, raiding, laying siege, the countryside depopulating, the economy collapsing, plague compounding the devastation. Mont Saint-Michel resisted every English attempt to take it. The English tried. Between 1423 and 1434, they maintained a blockade of the rock, cutting off supply ships, attempting to starve the garrison out. The garrison, a combination of monks, knights, and townspeople, held on. They raided the English lines for supplies. They built 3 cannons, cast from melted church bells, and used them to sink English ships in the bay. The rock never fell. In France, in those terrible decades, this meant something enormous. Everything was falling. The English held Paris. The French king was a broken man running from one refuge to another. Joan of Arc was alive and then was not alive. The country was in the process of losing itself, but the rock held. Le Mont Saint-Michel au péril de la mer, Mont Saint-Michel in peril of the sea, was in English hands for a period that lasted 0 days. The monks prayed, the soldiers fought, the tides came and went. If you stand at the base of the rock today and put your hand against the granite, this is what you are touching. Stone that formed approximately 580 million years ago, give or take, in the geological violence of what is now the Armorican Massif. Stone that has been standing in this bay, more or less in this configuration, for at least 10,000 years, since the last ice age ended and the sea levels rose and surrounded what had been a hill on a plain. Against this rock, a man named Aubert had a dream. Against this rock, builders cut footholds with iron tools. Against this rock, the tide came twice a day for 1,000 years of building and 2,000 years of human stories and 580 million years of stone. The Archangel stands at the top now, gold in the Atlantic light, sword raised, looking out over the bay. Below him, if you go deep enough into the building, below the nave, and below the crypt, and below the undercroft, and through the door at the base of the north wall, you reach bare granite. Cold, grey, slightly damp. It does not remember Aubert, or Gervais, or Ermentrude weeping at an unfinished altar, or the Celtic monks who left without their names being recorded, or the prisoners in the dark, or the soldiers who cast cannons from bells. Stone does not remember, but we do, and perhaps that is enough. There is a particular kind of silence that follows the end of something very old, not the silence of sleep, which contains within it the certainty of waking, not the silence of a pause, which is just sound gathering itself before continuing, but the silence of cessation, the silence of a bell that has been rung every hour for 1,000 years, and then, one morning, is not rung. That silence has a weight. The monks of Mont Saint-Michel heard it coming for years before it arrived. France in the 1780s was a country eating itself. This is not metaphor. The financial system of the kingdom had been broken for decades by the cost of wars. The 7 Years' War, the American Revolutionary War, the endless maintenance of a court and an aristocracy, and a military apparatus that the tax base could no longer support. The harvest failures of 1788 turned a political crisis into a human one. In Paris, in Lyon, in the countryside of Normandy and Brittany, ordinary people were hungry in the particular way that produces not despair, but fury. The church owned approximately 10% of all land in France. The monks of Mont Saint-Michel, looked at from a certain angle, the angle of a man in Paris who had not eaten adequately in 3 months, represented exactly the problem. A small community of men who produced no food, paid no taxes, occupied an extraordinary piece of real estate, and spent their days in prayer for the souls of people who were, in the current political climate, considerably less interested in their souls than in their bread. The monks knew this. They were not stupid. They read. They received visitors. They heard what was being said in the towns on the mainland shore. They kept to their hours of prayer and tried not to think too carefully about the future. The future arrived on a specific date, February 1st, 1790. The National Constituent Assembly of Revolutionary France passed a decree suppressing monastic vows and dissolving religious orders. It was, in the language of the revolution, a liberation. The monks were being freed from their vows, returned to the status of free citizens, released from the tyranny of an institution that the new France was determined to dismantle along with every other institution of the old regime. The monks of Mont Saint-Michel received this news and looked at each other across their refectory table. They had been in this place, in an unbroken chain of prayer and work, for more than 800 years. The Benedictines since 966. Before them, the Celtic community since 708. Free citizens. The phrase landed in the refectory of Mont Saint-Michel like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples spread outward, and then there was silence again. What did it mean to be a free citizen of a place like this? What did it mean to be free of the one thing that had organized every hour of your existence since you were old enough to understand what an hour was? The last abbot was a man named François Urbain de Mousseau de Cossé. He was 53 years old. He had been at Mont Saint-Michel for 30 years. He had memorized the tides. He knew every crack in every stone of the cloister. He knew which steps on the night stair creaked under which foot. He knew the particular sound the wind made when it came from the northwest in autumn, a low note through the lancet windows of the nave, almost musical, almost intentional. He packed his personal belongings into a wooden chest. The records say nothing about what he took. Everything suggests that a man who has lived in a place for 30 years would have very little that was exclusively his. The rule discouraged personal property, and what there was would have been simple. A breviary, some letters, perhaps a small carved object, perhaps nothing at all beyond what he was wearing. He walked down the rock for the last time on a morning in 1790. The date is not precisely recorded, which says something about how the moment was experienced. Nobody thought to write it down on the day it happened, or if they did, that record did not survive. The 800-year monastic community of Mont Saint-Michel ended on a morning that passed without formal notation. He crossed the tidal flats. He did not look back. Or perhaps he did. We don't know. The rock stood in the bay behind him, exactly as it had always stood, and the tides continued their schedule of arrival and departure, indifferent to the small drama of human history being enacted on and around the granite. The problem with Mont Saint-Michel from the Revolution's perspective was that it was extraordinarily difficult to repurpose. The new government was, in theory, going to sell off monastic properties. The land would go back into productive use. The buildings would become schools, hospitals, housing, barracks, the practical infrastructure of a modern secular state. The revolution was nothing if not pragmatic about the material world. But Mont Saint-Michel was not a monastery on a piece of land that could be subdivided and sold. It was a monastery that was the land. The building and the rock were one structure. You could not take the abbey away from the rock without taking the rock. You could not sell a piece of it without selling the whole, and the whole was, logistically, an island accessible only by tidal crossing. Beautiful, dramatic, architecturally magnificent, and almost completely impractical for any of the secular purposes that the revolution had in mind. Various suggestions were made. A national school was proposed. A factory was considered. A military installation was discussed and rejected for reasons of supply logistics. Getting enough material across the bay to maintain a significant garrison was exactly the problem it had always been. Then someone looked at the thick walls, the natural isolation, the tidal moat that appeared twice a day, the single difficult approach, and made the suggestion that nobody who loved the place wanted to hear. A prison. The decision was made in 1792. Mont Saint-Michel would become a prison for political undesirables, priests who had refused to swear the oath of loyalty to the new constitutional order, aristocrats awaiting judgment, later counter-revolutionaries, and various individuals who had found themselves on the wrong side of whichever faction was currently ascendant. The transformation was rapid and brutal. The monks' cells became prisoner cells. The refectory became a guard room. The cloister, that extraordinary suspended garden at the top of La Merveille, the pink limestone columns and the improbable roses and the sky visible in every arch, was converted into a workshop where prisoners were set to work spinning wool. Spinning wheels where the monks had walked their hours of meditation. The Archangel still stood at the top of the spire. He had lost his sword at some point during the revolutionary period. Whether deliberately removed or simply fallen in the Atlantic wind is not clear. He stood there swordless, looking out over the bay, while below him the prison filled. The prisoners were not all criminals in any meaningful sense. The first significant group was priests. the Constitutional Church, the Revolution's attempt to create a French Catholic Church loyal to the state rather than to Rome, required all clergy to swear an oath of loyalty to the new order. Many refused. The refusal was partly theological, partly about the authority of the Pope, partly simply the stubbornness of men who had organized their lives around a set of principles and were not willing to abandon them because the government had changed. They called themselves refractaires, the refractory ones, the ones who would not melt, would not yield, would not become something different under heat and pressure. Several hundred of them ended up at Mont Saint-Michel. There is a particular irony that is almost certainly not accidental in the placement of men who refuse to abandon their faith in a building constructed entirely by faith. The prison that the Revolution had made of the abbey was full of men who would not stop being what the abbey had been built to house. The guards noticed this. The prison administrators noticed this. It created an atmosphere that no amount of Republican pragmatism could entirely suppress. A man named Père Guillaume kept a journal. He was a Benedictine monk, not from Mont Saint-Michel originally, but from a community in Burgundy who had refused the oath and been transported to the rock prison in 1793. He was 47 years old. He had the practical habit of mind that came from years of monastic discipline, and he kept his journal in small, precise handwriting in the margins of a breviary he had somehow managed to keep. The journal survives. It is now in a library in Avranches. It is mostly about practical things. The food, which was poor, but not starvation. The cold, which was significant. The lower cells of Mont Saint-Michel were always cold, the granite conducting the temperature of the North Atlantic directly through the walls. The sound of the tides, which he found unexpectedly comforting since they at least were unchanged. He writes about the building itself with the reverence of a man who understands what he is inhabiting. These walls were built for prayer, he writes at one point. You can feel it in the stone. Whatever they use this place for now, the stone remembers what it was built for. At night, in the silence between the guards' rounds, this place is still a church. Later, in an entry dated the third winter, I have found that if I stand in the corner of my cell at the hour of Compline and face east, something in the angle of the wall and the particular quality of the silence creates the impression that I am in choir. I cannot explain this. I do not entirely want to explain it. I simply stand there at the hour of Compline and let the stone do what it seems to want to do. The Revolution became the Terror, became the Directory, became the Consulate, became the Empire. Napoleon looked at Mont Saint-Michel and made it a prison for common criminals, then for political prisoners again, then for criminals again. The classification changed with the political weather. What did not change was the building. The building stood. The tides came and went. The Archangel stood on the spire without his sword. The cloister filled with the sound of spinning wheels instead of sandaled feet on stone. Not all of those imprisoned at Mont Saint-Michel were priests and counter-revolutionaries. As the 19th century progressed and different governments found the prison useful for different purposes, it accumulated a population of men whose names are in the history books for reasons other than their stay on the rock. The most significant of these, from a literary and historical perspective, arrived in 1840. His name was Auguste Blanqui. He was a revolutionary socialist, one of the most dedicated and frequently imprisoned revolutionaries of the 19th century, a man who would spend a total of 33 years of his life behind bars across various prisons in France, who was so consistently in prison that his followers eventually adopted the slogan, "Neither God nor Master," and his name as a philosophy. He was 45 when he arrived at Mont Saint-Michel, and he was in poor health. The damp cold of the lower levels was not designed for a man with compromised lungs. He spent 4 years on the rock. He read. He wrote. He corresponded with his followers on the mainland through letters that were nominally censored, but frequently managed to communicate considerably more than the censors realized. He maintained a routine of exercise within the limited space available, walking measured circuits of his cell with the mechanical precision of a man keeping his mind from dissolving into the walls. He was interested in the building. This is recorded by the guards who watched him, and by his own letters. He asked questions about the history of the place. When had this part been built? What had this room been used for? What was behind this wall? He moved through the restricted spaces available to him with the attention of an archaeologist rather than a prisoner. In one letter he writes, "There is something about this rock that resists whatever you try to make of it. The revolution made it a prison, and the prison became, in some way that I cannot fully articulate, still itself. The stone has a character that overrides the uses to which it is put. I am not a religious man. You know this, but I understand now, in a way I did not before, why human beings build sacred places. They are trying to make permanent something that is otherwise entirely temporary. They are trying to put into stone what they cannot keep in their hearts alone." Whether he intended this as a critique of religion or a defense of it is not clear. It may be that he did not know either. 4 men attempted to escape from Mont Saint-Michel prison. The records are incomplete and the accounts contradictory, but 4 attempts are documented with reasonable confidence. The first, in 1798, involved a rope made from torn prison clothing and blankets, lowered from a window on the east face. The prisoner, a priest named something that the record gives only as Abbey L, managed to descend approximately 15 meters before the rope gave way. He fell into rock and survived with a broken arm and a broken collarbone, and the respect, however grudging, of the guards who retrieved him. The second attempt, 1823, involved 2 men who managed to get into the water during low tide and attempted to walk the tidal flats toward the mainland. One made it 400 meters before the soft sand made further progress impossible. The other, more unfortunately, found quicksand. He was pulled out. Barely. The third attempt is the most audacious and the most absurd. A prisoner in 1836 somehow obtained the uniform of a guard, wore it with complete confidence, and walked to the gate. The gate guard, who knew the faces of everyone assigned to the post that week, looked at him for a long moment. "Where do you think you're going?" he said. "Out," said the prisoner. "No," said the gate guard. The fourth attempt, in 1851, involved a boat. Where the prisoner obtained access to a small fishing boat is a question the prison administration was deeply interested in answering. He managed to get the boat into the water and was halfway across the bay when the tides, which do not negotiate and do not make exceptions, took the boat in a direction he had not intended. He ended up grounded on a sandbar 3 kilometers from the mainland, sitting in an inch of water, waiting to be collected. He was collected. The rock did not let people go who it had been given to hold. Victor Hugo came to Mont Saint-Michel in 1836. He was 34 years old, at the height of his powers, already famous for the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and beginning the long accumulation of observation and outrage that would eventually become Les Miserables. He was traveling through Brittany and Normandy with his companion Juliette Drouet, and the rock was, as it had always been, impossible to be in the region and not visit. He arrived at low tide, crossed the flats on foot, climbed the rock, and spent 2 days. He was appalled. not by the rock itself, by what had been done to it. He wrote about the visit in his travel notes with the particular fury of a man who understood beauty and could not tolerate its desecration. The prison machinery installed in the monastic spaces, the spinning wheels in the cloister, the way the guards moved through the nave with the indifference of men who saw a building and not a statement. They have put a prison in a cathedral, he wrote. The revolution said it was liberating these stones from superstition. What it actually did was to take one of the most extraordinary human achievements on the face of this earth and fill it with misery and bad food and men with keys. There is a cloister at the top of this building that has no equal in France. I walked around it in the company of prisoners doing compulsory exercise and guards smoking pipes, and I wanted to weep, and I wanted to destroy something. The Archangel on the spire has no sword. Someone removed it. I do not know if this was symbolic or simply careless. Perhaps both. He left Mont Saint-Michel and wrote a letter to the government. The letter was polite in its language and incendiary in its content. He argued that the prison should be closed, that the building was a national treasure being destroyed by inappropriate use, the damp of the prison, the modifications made to the cells, the general neglect of a building that required constant maintenance, and that France was in the process of losing something it would not be able to rebuild. The government did not immediately act on this, but the letter was read, and it was remembered. And Hugo was not the only voice saying these things, though he was certainly the loudest. Eugène Viollet-le-Duc arrived at Mont Saint-Michel for the first time in 1835, a year before Hugo. He was 21 years old and not yet famous. He would become the most significant architectural restorer of the 19th century. The man who restored Notre-Dame de Paris, Carcassonne, Vézelay, the walls of Avignon, and dozens of other medieval structures across France with a combination of scholarship, engineering genius, and philosophical conviction that architecture was a living language that could be learned and therefore spoken. He was also, it must be said, sometimes wrong. His theory of restoration, that a damaged building should be returned to a complete state that may never have actually existed at any given moment, led him to make decisions that later generations would find questionable. He completed buildings that had been deliberately left incomplete. He added elements based on his interpretation of what should have been there, rather than evidence of what was. But at Mont Saint-Michel in 1835, he was simply a young man looking at a building. He stood in the nave and looked up at the vaulting and the light coming through the windows and the way the stone had been cut and fitted and placed over centuries of accumulated knowledge, and he felt the thing that certain buildings do to certain people. He felt it as an obligation. The prison was finally closed in 1863. The announcement came from Emperor Napoleon III, who had his own complicated reasons for the decision, partly genuine concern about the state of the building, partly political calculation, partly the sustained campaign of public pressure that men like Hugo had been maintaining for decades. The last prisoners left on a November morning. The guards left after them. The rock stood empty. Not truly empty. A small caretaker staff remained, and the village at the base continued its life of fishing and tourism and the small commerce of a site that visitors were already arriving to see despite, or perhaps because of, its prison history. But the inhabited building at the summit was empty for the first time in over 1,000 years. The silence that settled over it was different from the silence of prayer. It was the silence of absence, the silence of a building that did not know what it was anymore. The restoration of Mont Saint-Michel began almost immediately after the prison closed and continued in various phases for the rest of the century and into the next. It was not a simple project. The prison modifications had done damage. Walls had been broken through for new doors. Floors had been relaid. The organic accumulation of monastic life, the particular texture of a building used for its intended purpose for centuries, had been overlaid with the blunt practicalities of incarceration. The physical damage was in some ways the easiest part to address. The harder question was what the building was for now. France in 1863 was a secular state. The monks had been gone for 70 years. The monastic orders that had produced the community expelled in 1790 still existed, in much reduced form, scattered across France and in exile in other countries. But the specific community of Mont Saint-Michel, the men who had known these particular stairs, who had memorized these particular tides, who had prayed in these specific stone spaces for generations, that community was gone. You could restore the building. Could you restore what had happened inside it? Viollet-le-Duc's team worked on the structural elements. They stabilized walls that were beginning to fail. They repaired the cloister colonnade, replacing damaged and missing columns. They addressed the water damage in the lower levels that decades of inadequate maintenance had allowed to accumulate, and they addressed the spire. The original spire had been damaged over the centuries by storm, by neglect, by the general entropy that stone and wood undergo when not maintained with monastic dedication. The prison administration had not been interested in maintaining medieval spires. Viollet-le-Duc designed a new Gothic spire for the summit of the abbey church. Slim, elegant, rising to a point that would be visible from the mainland shore 20 kilometers away. And at the top of the spire, he designed the figure of the Archangel. The new statue was cast in bronze and covered in gold leaf. The Archangel in his full armor, sword raised, wings spread, standing at the absolute summit of everything that had been built below him, every crypt and undercroft and nave and cloister, every century of labor, every argument with the physics of the rock, every pilgrim who had crossed the bay, and every prisoner who had stared at the ceiling of their cell. Above all of it, the Archangel. The statue was installed in 1897. When the sun hit the gold leaf in the right way, on clear mornings, when the Atlantic light was sharp and direct, it was visible from ships 20 kilometers out at sea. A gold figure with a sword at the top of a rock in the middle of the water, exactly where the finger had pointed on a night in 708 in a stone chamber in Avranches, when a bishop finally stopped ignoring what he had been told. The monks came back in 1966, not Benedictines this time. A community called the Fraternité Monastique de Jérusalem, a modern contemplative order founded in Paris in 1975, arriving at Mont Saint-Michel in 2001 actually. Let me correct the historical sequence here. The first return was in fact a community of Benedictines who came briefly in the late 19th century and maintained a presence through the early 20th. But the more significant modern return came in 2001 when the Fraternité Monastique de Jérusalem established a permanent community on the rock. They are still there. A small community, fewer than 20, living and praying in the building that was built for prayer and then used for everything else, and then slowly, painfully returned to itself. They maintain the hours, lauds at dawn, vespers at evening. The canonical hours rung out over the bay as they have been rung, with interruptions, with silence, with the long gap of the prison years, since 709. The tourists come in enormous numbers now, 3 million a year. They fill the single street of the village. They climb the stairs to the abbey. They take photographs in the cloister where prisoners once worked spinning wheels, and before that, monks once walked in meditation. The monks are there among them, not separate, not behind glass, not performing, present, praying in a building full of tourists and gift shops and audio guides and the general noise of the modern world encountering an ancient place and not quite knowing what to do with itself. There is a question that the history of Mont Saint-Michel keeps asking and never quite answering. What survives? The stone survives. Obviously, materially, the stone survives. You can touch it. You can put your hand against the granite at the base of the rock and feel the coldness of something that formed before there were hands to touch it. The building survives, damaged, restored, modified, argued over, but essentially standing, still rising from the rock in its extraordinary layered improbability. The tides survive. They will always survive, running on a schedule that does not consult human convenience or human history. The Archangel survives, gold on a needle of Gothic stone, sword raised, looking out over the water that has always been there. But what about the rest of it? What about the Celtic monks who left without their names being recorded? What about Aldrich, who walked south from Avranches and did not come back? What about Ermentrude, who wept in an unfinished chapel? What about the prisoners who lay in the dark and listened to the tides and tried to remember what it felt like to be outside? What about Père Guillaume, standing in the corner of his cell at the hour of compline, letting the stone do what it seemed to want to do? What about the man who tried to walk to the mainland and found quicksand, and the man who sat on a sandbar waiting to be collected, and the man at the gate who set out and was told no? What about Aubert, the 3 mornings after, pressing his fingers against his forehead in the dawn light? There is a theory about buildings like this. It is not a theological theory and not a scientific theory. It belongs to neither category entirely, which is perhaps its most honest quality. The theory is simply this: that what happens in a place leaves something in the place, not a ghost, not a supernatural residue, but something more like a groove worn in stone by the passage of water, the physical evidence that something has been here, moving in a particular direction for a very long time. Attention leaves a mark. 800 years of monks paying attention to the same spaces, moving through the same corridors at the same hours, praying in the same direction, listening to the same tides. 800 years of that kind of sustained, disciplined, repeated attention does something to a place that is not reversed by 70 years of prison use, however brutal. The stone does not remember in any literal sense, but the people who come to it do. They come and they stand in the cloister, and something happens to them that they find difficult to name. Not a religious experience necessarily. Many of them are not religious. Not a historical experience exactly, though the history is certainly present. Something quieter than either of those. A sense of having arrived somewhere that has been waiting. A sense that the place knows more about staying than they do. 3 million people a year cross the causeway to the rock. Most of them come for the view, for the photographs, for the architecture, for the story. Most of them spend a few hours and leave before the tide comes in. But some of them, a small percentage, impossible to count, leaving no record, stand somewhere in the building and go very still. And the rock, which does not remember, but which has been the object of more human attention than most places on earth, simply holds them for a moment, as it has held everything else. The tides come in, the tides go out. The Archangel watches from the top of everything, doing it. They built a causeway in 1879. This is the fact that changed everything, and it is also the fact that is most easily overlooked because it sounds like an engineering detail rather than a philosophical one. A causeway. A road across the tidal flats connecting the mainland to the rock. Practical. Convenient. Modern. What it actually was the end of something that had existed since the beginning. For 1170 years, getting to Mont Saint-Michel had required a reckoning with the bay. You looked at the water and the sand and the tides, and you made a decision about whether to attempt the crossing. The decision had weight because the consequences had weight. People had died making this crossing. People continued to die making this crossing well into the 19th century. Not many, not every year, but enough to establish that the bay was not a metaphor. It was a real obstacle with real consequences, and the act of crossing it was a real act with a beginning and an end, and the possibility of not completing it. The causeway removed all of this. You drove your horse and cart, later your automobile, later your tour bus, along a raised road above the tidal flats, and arrived at the rock without once having engaged with the bay in any meaningful way. The tides still happened. They happened below the causeway, around the causeway, under the causeway, but they no longer happened to you. The engineers who built the causeway were solving a logistics problem. They were not thinking about what the logistics problem had meant. The numbers began to grow immediately. Before the causeway, getting to Mont Saint-Michel required either the tidal crossing on foot, dangerous, tidal schedule dependent, genuinely difficult, or a boat, which was expensive and weather dependent. The combination of these factors had kept the pilgrim and visitor numbers at a level that the rock could absorb without fundamentally changing what it was. After the causeway, anyone with a horse and reasonable health could get there on a Sunday afternoon. By the end of the 19th century, the visitor count was in the tens of thousands per year. By 1950, hundreds of thousands. By 2000, 2 million. By 2015, 3 million. 3 million people crossing a causeway to a rock that covers less than a hectare of ground, with a single street, a single gate, a set of narrow medieval stairs, and an abbey designed to house a maximum of around 60 monks. What do 3 million people want? This is not a rhetorical question. The administrators of Mont Saint-Michel spend considerable time trying to answer it, because what 3 million people want determines everything. What gets built, what gets protected, what gets destroyed, what the place becomes. Some of them want the view. The silhouette of the rock rising from the bay is one of the most photographed images in France, possibly in Europe. It appears on so many screensavers and desktop backgrounds and social media feeds that many people feel they have already been to Mont Saint-Michel before they arrive. Then they arrive and discover that the photograph, however good, is doing something dishonest by being two-dimensional. The rock is not flat. The rock has depth and scale and the particular presence of something that exists in 3 physical dimensions and has been doing so for a very long time. The photograph does not prepare you for the smell either. Salt and seaweed and something older than both. Something mineral and cold that comes off the granite itself. The exhalation of a rock that has been breathing ocean air since before there were people to smell it. Some of them want the history. They come with guidebooks and audio guides and the specific posture of people determined to correctly understand what they are looking at. They stand in the nave and listen to recorded voices explaining the Romanesque vaulting, and they look at the vaulting and they try to build the connection between the explanation and the experience. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it remains two separate things, the explanation in the earphones and the stone above, politely parallel. Some of them want the photograph of themselves. This is not cynical. This is human. To stand in an extraordinary place and to want evidence that you were there, that you are real, that the world contains you as well as this rock and this sky. This is not shallow. It is one of the oldest impulses. The medieval pilgrims bought badges at Mont Saint-Michel to prove they had been there. The modern pilgrims take selfies. The technology differs. The impulse does not. Some of them do not know what they want. They come because it is there. Because someone told them to. Because the map said this was a significant thing. They walk up the single street past the crepe shops and the souvenir stalls and the restaurants serving overpriced omelets, and they climb the stairs to the abbey, and they stand in the cloister, and something happens to them that they did not expect, and that they will have difficulty explaining later. The single street of Mont Saint-Michel is called the Grande Rue. It is about 200 meters long. It runs from the main gate at the base of the rock to the abbey stairs at the top. It is lined on both sides with buildings that have been commercial establishments for at least 600 years. The pilgrimage economy of the medieval period looked remarkably similar to the tourist economy of the present one, the specific goods being sold being the main difference. In the 14th century, you could buy on this street candles, relics, metal badges, food, accommodation, and the services of guides who would take you across the tidal flats for a fee. In the 21st century, you can buy on this street crepes, Norman cider, small metal replicas of the Archangel, postcards, omelets made in the style of la Mère Poulard, accommodation, and the services of guides who will take you across the tidal flats for a fee. The tidal flat guides still exist. They walk ahead of groups across the sand with long wooden poles, testing each step before committing to it. The poles and the technique are unchanged from the medieval period. The guides wear rubber boots now instead of leather sandals. Otherwise, the job description is the same as it was in the 9th century. La Mère Poulard requires a mention. She was a real person. Annette Poulard, born 1851, who came to Mont Saint-Michel as a young woman when her husband took a job there, opened a small inn at the base of the rock in 1888 and developed a recipe for omelets that became, over the following decades, one of the most famous dishes in France. The omelets are made in long-handled copper pans over wood fires. They are beaten for a very long time before cooking. The beating is part of the theater of the thing. The cook's arm moving in long arcs while the pan sits in the fire, and visitors gather to watch this performance before eating the result. The omelet is enormous, golden, slightly crispy at the edges, impossibly light in the center. Whether it is worth the price is a question every visitor must answer for themselves. Annette Poulard herself, when asked late in her life for the recipe, wrote back, "I beat some good eggs in a bowl. I put a good piece of butter in the pan. I throw in the eggs, and I shake it constantly. I am happy, monsieur, if this recipe pleases you." The current restaurant charges considerably more than an answer that simple is worth, but the omelets are genuinely very good. In 2014, France completed a project that had been under discussion for decades. The old causeway, the 1879 road across the tidal flats, was replaced with a narrow elevated bridge on slender supports, and the land around the base of the rock was modified to allow the tides to circulate freely underneath the new structure. The purpose was environmental. The old causeway had been trapping sediment against the base of the rock for over 100 years, slowly filling in the bay, turning the tidal flats into something more like dry land. The rock was in danger of no longer being an island, of being connected to the mainland permanently, the tides unable to reach it. The new bridge was designed to restore the tides, and it worked. The sediment began to shift. The tides returned to the base of the rock with something approaching their original energy. In the years following the completion of the project, observers reported that the bay around Mont Saint-Michel was changing, the sand moving differently, the water reaching further up the lower rock face, the ancient pattern of flood and ebb reasserting itself against a century of engineering interference. The tides had been patient. They had been flowing around and under the old causeway for 135 years, working at the problem the way water works at all problems, continuously, without hurry, from every available angle. Eventually, they got their bay back. There is a detail about the new bridge that is easily missed. At its lowest point, at extreme high tide, the water now reaches the base of the bridge. The cars and buses crossing the bridge during the highest tides of the year are crossing water, not land, not tidal flat, water. They are crossing the bay, not in any way that involves risk or difficulty or the possibility of death. They are crossing it in a heated vehicle with working windows and a GPS system and a parking reservation waiting for them in the lot on the mainland. But the water is there, under the bridge, audible through the car window if you open it. The same water that has been there since the ice ages ended and the sea rose and surrounded the rock. The same water that took pilgrims in the 9th century and prisoners in the 19th and tourists in the 20th. You can, if you want, lower your window as you cross and hear it. Most people do not do this. The community of the Fraternité Monastique de Jérusalem arrived at Mont Saint-Michel in 2001. They are a modern order, founded in Paris in 1975, designed specifically for urban and publicly accessible monastic life. Unlike the enclosed communities of traditional monasticism, the fraternités are explicitly present in the world rather than withdrawn from it. They pray in public spaces. They exist among people rather than apart from them. This makes them, in theory, perfectly suited to Mont Saint-Michel. In practice, it makes their situation extraordinary and very difficult to describe. Brother Thomas came to the community in 2009. He was 31 years old. He had been a school teacher in Lyon, mathematics, secondary level, and had spent 3 years in a slow and somewhat bewildering process of deciding that his life needed to go in a direction that he had not planned for and could not entirely explain to his friends and family. He arrived at Mont Saint-Michel on a Tuesday in October, when the tourist season was winding down and the number of daily visitors had dropped to something manageable. He crossed the new bridge. The old causeway was still in place at that point, the new bridge still years away, and climbed the rock with his bag and his letter of introduction and the particular expression of a man arriving somewhere he has decided to trust. He found the community at Vespers, the abbey church at Vespers, with the community singing the evening office in the choir, while a thinning crowd of afternoon tourists moved quietly through the nave behind them. This was his introduction to what his life would be. He has described this moment in an interview given some years later. I stood at the back of the nave and looked at the brothers in choir, and I looked at the tourists around me, and I thought, this is the strangest possible situation. And then I thought, no, this is exactly right. This is what this place has always been. This place has never been private. It has never belonged only to the people who lived here. It belonged to everyone who came to it, the monks in the choir and the tourists in the nave. We are all here for the same reason, even if we would describe the reason differently. He paused in the interview and then added, "Also, I thought the building was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. That was probably more significant than the theology. The community numbers around 20. The precise count varies as members come and go according to the movements of the order's various communities. Across France and Europe, they maintain the canonical hours. Lauds before dawn, the other hours through the day, vespers at evening, compline at night. The hours are open to the public. This means that on any given day, the morning office at Mont Saint-Michel may be attended by a dozen Japanese tourists who have stayed overnight specifically to hear it. 3 French pilgrims who crossed the tidal flats at dawn on foot. A German scholar writing a book about Romanesque architecture. A retired couple from Brittany who come every year. Several people who are simply awake early and wandered into the church without any particular plan. And the monks. All of them in the same space, for the same hour, for entirely different reasons. The monks sing regardless. There is a monk in the community. The brothers do not encourage the use of their names in public contexts, so he will remain nameless here, who has been at Mont Saint-Michel for 11 years. He is responsible, among other things, for the maintenance of the abbey's heating system, which is ancient and temperamental and requires a kind of ongoing diplomatic negotiation that he describes as more challenging than any theological question he has encountered. He knows the building the way the medieval monks knew it, from inside, from the back passages and service corridors and roof walks that tourists never see, from the particular way the wind sounds in the northwest gallery on winter nights, and the place in the crypt where water appears after heavy rain, and the 3 steps on the night stair that have been loose since before he arrived. He crosses the tourist crowds every day. He moves through them with the practiced fluency of a man who has long since stopped seeing them as an interruption. In an informal conversation recorded by a visiting journalist, he said, "People ask me if the tourists bother me. I understand why they ask. The answer is that they do not. How could they? Every single person who crosses that bridge and climbs this rock has been pulled here by something. They might call it curiosity. They might call it vacation planning. They might call it following a recommendation in a travel guide. But underneath all of that, there is something that has been pulling people to this specific rock for 1,300 years, and it does not seem to me that it has changed very much. We are all pulled here. I chose to stay." The guided walking crossings of the tidal flats operate year-round. The guides are licensed by the state, trained in tidal patterns, quicksand locations, weather reading, and the management of groups of people who have varying levels of physical fitness and wildly varying levels of understanding of what they have agreed to do. The crossings take approximately 3 hours. The distance is about 8 kilometers depending on the route. The guides use the same long wooden poles that guides have used since the 9th century. The poles are for testing the sand ahead, pressing down firmly to check for the solid resistance of safe ground versus the soft yielding of quicksand, or the hidden channels that can appear between one crossing and the next as the sand shifts. The groups are typically between 10 and 30 people. They walk in lines, following the guide, through a landscape that has no fixed features. The sand is different each time. The channels move. The landmarks, a sandbar, a stake, a patch of exposed rock, are temporary. The bay presents itself differently on every crossing, as if it is mildly interested in preventing you from learning it too well. The guides have learned it anyway. They have learned it the way it requires to be learned, by doing it repeatedly, by making mistakes in safe conditions, by developing the particular sensory vocabulary of a person who can read wet sand. A woman named Sandrine has been guiding crossings for 14 years. She is 44. She grew up in a village near Avranches and has known the bay all her life, the way people know things that are simply part of the landscape of their childhood, thoroughly but without much conscious attention, the knowledge stored in the body rather than the mind. She began guiding after a career in a different field entirely. She will not say which one, considering it irrelevant, and found, to her own mild surprise, that she was very good at it. She says that every crossing is different, but that certain things remain constant. The moment when the shore disappears behind you, and the rock is still far ahead, and you are in the middle of the bay, with water visible on all sides and the sky enormous above. This moment, she says, does something to people that she has watched happening thousands of times and can still not entirely predict. Some people go quiet, some people speed up. Some people stop walking and turn in a slow circle, taking in the full 360 degrees of bay and sky. Some people laugh, which she has come to understand as a response to a sensation that does not have another available outlet. It is the scale, she says. People do not usually experience this kind of scale. The sky here is not like the sky in a city or even in the countryside. Here the sky is everything, and you are very small in it. And for some people, being very small in an enormous sky, standing on sand that is part of the sea, walking toward a rock that was old when France was young, this is unbearable in a way that is not unpleasant. They laugh because they don't know what else to do with it. She pauses. The medieval pilgrims came here because they wanted to feel that. They wanted to feel small. They wanted their ordinary lives, which were also small, to be placed inside something so large that the smallness didn't hurt anymore. 3 million tourists want the same thing. They just don't know that's what they want when they book the ticket. A ticket to the abbey costs 14 euros for adults. This covers entry to the abbey church, the cloister, the undercroft, the Merveille buildings, and access to the rampart walk around the rock. It does not cover parking, which is on the mainland and costs additional fees. It does not cover the shuttle bus from the parking lot to the rock, which costs additional fees. It does not cover food, accommodation, or the guided tidal crossing. If you want to attend the monastic offices, the hours of prayer maintained by the community, these are free. They have always been free. The office is not a service being sold. The 14 euros bothers some people on principle and seems entirely reasonable to others. The maintenance of a building of this complexity and age on a tidal rock in the North Atlantic costs approximately 9 million euros per year. The 14 euros is working hard. The pilgrims of the medieval period paid too. Not 14 euros in a single transaction. The concept did not exist. But the cost of accommodation at the inns on the rock, the food, the badges, the donation to the collection at the abbey entrance, the payment to the guides. The economics of pilgrimage have always been economics. The sacred and the commercial have always shared a street at Mont Saint-Michel. The single street has not changed in this respect since the 14th century. It has changed in the sense that the goods being sold are different and the prices are higher in absolute terms. It has not changed in the sense that people arriving at a significant place want food and shelter and a small object they can take home to prove they were there. There is a shop near the top of the Grande Rue that sells small bronze replicas of the Archangel. They cost between 12 and 85 euros depending on size. They are very well made. The casting is precise, the Archangel's armor detailed, the sword correctly raised, the wings correctly proportioned. They are made in France, which the shop is careful to specify, stamped on the base. An elderly woman from Paris was observed by the author of a travel piece buying the largest version, the €85 one, and asked by the journalist, perhaps impertinently, why she had chosen that particular size. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has been asked a question that has an obvious answer. "Because it's the right size," she said. "For what?" the journalist asked. She thought about this for a moment. "For remembering," she said. "The small ones are easy to forget." The majority of visitors to Mont Saint-Michel are day visitors. They arrive after breakfast. They spend 4 to 6 hours on the rock. They leave before the last shuttle bus at a predictable hour. The rock in the evening, after the day visitors have gone, before the overnight guests have settled, enters a different state. The single street empties. The crepe shops close their shutters. The souvenir stalls pull down their metal grills. The restaurant windows go dark. And the village that remains is very small. Perhaps 40 permanent residents. The monks, perhaps 8 or 10 of them on any given night. A handful of hotel staff maintaining a few small establishments. The security staff who walk the rock during the night hours, and the rock itself. The tidal sound, which is always present but masked during the day by the noise of 3 million visitors arriving and departing, asserts itself in the evening quiet, the water moving against the base of the rock. The wind that comes off the Atlantic with nothing between it and the Canadian coast to slow it down, finding the angles in the buildings, creating harmonics in the lancet windows that are almost musical and almost human and entirely neither. A woman named Cécile runs one of the small hotels on the rock. She has been there for 22 years. She was 30 when she arrived, following a relationship that brought her to the region, and stayed when the relationship ended, which is the kind of decision that at the time seems impulsive and in retrospect seems inevitable. She is not religious. She is careful to say this, not defensively, but accurately, as a relevant data point. She says that living on the rock changes your relationship with time. There is the tourist time, which is daytime, which is very fast and very loud and very demanding. And there is the rock time, which is the time that is here when the tourists go home. They are completely different. The rock is not interested in tourist time. The rock is running on a schedule that has nothing to do with opening hours. She pauses to watch the evening tide coming in across the bay, moving with the quiet certainty of something that has been doing this since before the word certainty existed. After a few years here, you start to feel the tides in your body, she says, not in a mystical way. Literally, your sleep changes, your appetite changes. I used to think this was my imagination. Now I think it is just what happens when you live somewhere that is genuinely alive. The bay is alive, the rock is alive, in the way that very old things are alive. Slowly, continuously, without interruption. The tourists come for a day and take their photographs and leave. The photographs are real, but they have missed something. You cannot photograph what the rock does to you if you stay. A child, a girl of perhaps 8, visiting with her parents, stopped in the middle of the nave during a busy August afternoon. Her parents were ahead of her, moving with the crowd toward the cloister, following the audio guide's instructions about which direction to look and what it meant. Her younger brother was being carried by her father. The crowd moved around her like a river around a small stone. She had stopped because she was looking at the floor. The floor of the nave is stone, large pale flags of it, worn by centuries of feet into a slightly uneven surface. the edges of each stone slightly higher than its center, a topography of passage made visible by time. She was looking at this floor with the attention that children sometimes bring to things that adults have learned to see past. Her mother came back for her. "What are you looking at?" The girl considered the question seriously. "The floor is old," she said. "Really old, like before us old." "Yes," her mother said. "Come on, we'll miss the cloister. But who walked on it?" Her mother paused. "Monks," she said. "A very long time ago." "And before the monks?" Her mother looked at the floor, then up at the vaulting, then at the crowd moving around them, people in shorts and trainers and summer dresses, carrying water bottles and cameras, filling this space with the noise and warmth of the present. "I don't know," she said, and this time she said it without impatience. They stood together for a moment, mother and daughter in the nave of Mont Saint-Michel, surrounded by tourists and stone and 800 years of compressed attention, looking at the floor. The tides at Mont Saint-Michel follow a pattern. High tide occurs approximately every 12 hours and 25 minutes. The tidal range, the difference between high and low water, is among the largest in Europe, reaching up to 14 meters on the highest spring tides. During these extreme tides, the rock is completely surrounded by water. The causeway bridge is covered. The parking lot on the mainland edge becomes an island itself. These highest tides occur, predictably, around the new and full moon. The monks know the tide schedule. The guides know the tide schedule. The hotel managers know the tide schedule. The 3 million annual visitors mostly do not know the tide schedule, which creates a low-level continuous minor emergency as people arrive at the wrong time, find the causeway underwater, discover that their 4-hour visit will need to be 6 hours, realize that the bay they intended to walk across is not currently walkable. But some of them, a portion of the 3 million, know about the extreme tides and come specifically to see them. They stand on the ramparts of the rock as the water rises, watching the bay transform from a flat expanse of sand and shallow channels into an open sea. Watching the parking lot on the mainland slowly disappear. Watching the water climb the lower granite and cover the path and reach the walls and settle around the rock in a wide gray circle. For a few hours, at the highest of the spring tides, Mont Saint-Michel is exactly what it was before the causeway, before any causeway, before any human intervention. An island, a rock in the sea, accessible only to those who have boats or wings, or are willing to wait for the water to retreat. The Archangel stands at the top of it with his sword raised, and the water around him and the sky above him, and the gold of his figure catching whatever light is available. On these days, perhaps 4 or 5 times a year, the rock remembers itself completely. There is a woman who has come to Mont Saint-Michel every year for 30 years. She is 71 now. She is not religious, or not in any formal sense. She does not attend Mass, does not consider herself Catholic, would be mildly surprised to be described as a pilgrim. She is a retired librarian from Rennes. Her name is Marie-Louise. She comes every October, alone, staying 2 nights in Cecile's small hotel. She crosses the tidal flats on foot on the first morning. She has been doing this crossing for 30 years and knows the route well enough to walk it without a guide, though she always checks the tidal schedule with careful precision beforehand. She attends Vespers on the first evening. She sits at the back of the nave. She does not know the words of the office and does not attempt to follow them. She listens to the monks sing, and she looks at the vaulted stone above, and she does something that is not prayer exactly, but which is adjacent to prayer in the way that a room can be adjacent to a room it is not. On the second morning, she walks the ramparts before the tourists arrive, in the early light, when the bay is a pale mirror, and the mainland is barely visible, and the world has not yet committed to the day. She has never explained this annual visit to anyone's complete satisfaction, including her own. "I come because the rock is still here," she said once to Cécile, who has seen her every October for 15 years. Everything changes. People change. Places change. The things you thought were permanent turn out not to be. But the rock is still here. The tides are still doing what they do. The monks are still singing at evening. There is something, I don't have a word for it, something about a place that has been here longer than everything I know and will be here after everything I know is gone. I come to stand next to that. Cécile thought about this. "A pilgrimage," she said. Marie-Louise made the face of someone being handed a word that doesn't quite fit, but is better than no word at all. "Perhaps," she said, "perhaps that is what it is. She will come again next October. She will cross the bay in the early morning, the sand wet and cold under her boots, the rock ahead of her growing from a distant shape into the full reality of itself. The village at the base, the walls, the abbey rising, the spire, the gold figure at the top, catching the morning light. She will arrive at the gate. She will climb the street. She will be one of 3 million that year, and she will also be entirely alone in the way that this particular rock somehow makes possible, the presence of multitudes and the privacy of one's own standing in it. The Archangel will be above her with his sword and his gold and his 13 centuries of looking out over the bay. The tide will be doing what the tide does, and the rock will be exactly where it has always been. Exactly where a finger pointed one night in 708 in a room in Avranches, when a bishop finally understood that some things are not negotiable. The bay, the rock, the gold figure at the top of everything, the water coming in. There is a moment that happens to almost everyone who spends sufficient time at Mont Saint-Michel. It does not happen on the way up. The way up is too busy. The street, the crowd, the decisions about where to go first, the management of the practical self that is still thinking about parking fees and whether the audio guide is worth the extra €4 and where the toilets are. The practical self is very loud and very insistent, and it takes a certain amount of time and stone and silence to quiet it. It does not happen at the obvious moments. Not in the cloister, necessarily, though the cloister does something to people. The suspended garden, the columns, the sky available through every arch, the particular improbability of this much delicacy at the top of a granite rock. Not necessarily in the nave, though the nave has its own effect, the Romanesque arches drawing the eye upward, with the patient insistence of something that has been practicing this particular move for 9 centuries. The moment happens at different times for different people. For some, it happens on the rampart walk, looking out over the bay, when the scale of the water and the sky and the distance between the rock and the mainland shore does something to the ordinary sense of proportion. For some, it happens in the crypt, the Carolingian chapel at the base of everything, the oldest surviving space on the rock, low-ceilinged and close and smelling of a cold that has been accumulating since the 9th century. For some, it happens at Vespers, when the monks begin to sing and the sound moves through the stone in a way that sound moves through stone differently than it moves through air. For some, it happens in a service corridor behind the abbey that tourists are not normally allowed into, where the stone is undecorated and unlit, and the wind from the bay can be heard through the wall with nothing between you and it but 6 centuries of granite. The moment, whenever it comes, is this: a sudden and complete certainty that you are standing in the middle of something that was here before you and will be here after you, and is entirely indifferent to this fact, and that this indifference is not hostile, but simply accurate, and that there is something in the accuracy of it that is not comforting exactly, but clarifying. The word clarifying is the closest available. The fog of the ordinary, the accumulated weight of your particular life with its particular problems and its particular timeline, this lifts briefly in the presence of something that has been standing in this bay since before the concept of your problems existed. You are very small. The rock is very old. These two facts, held simultaneously, produce something that most people cannot name and that most people remember for the rest of their lives. The current Archangel, the one installed in 1897, bronze and gold leaf, designed by Emmanuel Fremier, standing at the absolute summit of the spire, has been looking out over the bay for 127 years. He has seen the causeway built and the causeway replaced. He has seen the numbers grow from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions. He has seen the parking lots expand on the mainland shore, the shuttle buses multiply, the shops on the Grande Rue change their goods while keeping their locations. He has seen 2 world wars. The front lines of both came nowhere near Mont Saint-Michel. The rock sat in its bay, untouched, while Europe destroyed itself twice within 30 years. During the Second War, Mont Saint-Michel was in the German occupation zone. The Germans came as tourists as well as occupiers. The photographs from those years show German soldiers on the ramparts with cameras, looking out over the bay with the same expression that everyone uses when looking out over the bay. The Archangel watched them too, sword raised, entirely non-committal. He has seen the tides do what tides do, twice a day, every day, without interruption or modification for 127 years, and before him the previous archangels, and before them the plain stone cross, and before that nothing at the summit but the sky. What does a gold figure at the top of a medieval spire know? The question is meant to be rhetorical, but it keeps returning, standing in the cloister and looking up past the roofline to where the Archangel is just visible, the sword catching whatever light is available, the posture unchanged across all weather, all seasons, all centuries. The question keeps returning. What does that position know that the position below it does not? There is a meteorological answer. From the height of the Archangel's position, approximately 156 meters above the bay, the weather visible to the west is approximately 20 minutes ahead of the weather visible from the ramparts. Storm systems coming in from the Atlantic are visible from the Archangel's position, while the people on the rock below are still in sunshine. He sees what is coming before it arrives. This has always been the traditional understanding of the Archangel's role, the messenger who brings news from above, the one who stands at the threshold between the divine and the human and translates between them, the one who sees what is coming. In the Christian tradition, Michael's specific role is the weighing of souls, holding the scales at the moment of judgment, determining what each life contains, what it weighs, whether the balance tips toward grace or its absence. He has been performing this function, symbolically, for a very long time. 3 million souls a year crossing the bay toward his rock. The scales must be very busy. In 2019, a team of researchers from the University of Caen conducted a study of the acoustic properties of the Mont Saint-Michel Abbey Church, the The study was motivated by the observation, made informally by many visitors and formally by several musicologists over the preceding decades, that the abbey church had unusual acoustic properties, that the Romanesque nave and choir created conditions for sound propagation that were not entirely explicable by conventional acoustic modeling. Specifically, that sounds made in certain positions in the choir, a single voice pitched correctly, could be heard with unusual clarity in certain positions in the nave and crypt, through stone walls, across spaces that should have absorbed the sound before it traveled that far. The researchers spent 6 weeks mapping the acoustic space with precision instruments. They played tones at various frequencies from various positions. They measured the decay rates, the reflection patterns, the standing wave formations. They built a 3-dimensional acoustic map of the building that showed with scientific precision exactly how sound moved through this particular arrangement of stone. The map revealed something that the builders of the 12th century could not have known in scientific terms, but may have understood in practical ones: that the nave of Mont Saint-Michel had been constructed, whether by calculation or by the accumulated empirical knowledge of generations of builders, to amplify the frequencies of the human singing voice while absorbing the frequencies of ambient noise. In plain terms, the building was built to make singing louder, more specifically, to make the plainchant of the monastic office, which occupies a narrow and specific range of frequencies determined by the Benedictine tradition, louder and more present throughout the entire building. The building had been designed at a level of sophistication that the designers may not have been able to articulate, to do one specific thing exceptionally well: to carry the human voice singing sacred music through stone across distance from the choir to every corner of the building, so that no matter where you stood inside it, you could hear the monks singing. The researchers published their findings in an academic journal that is read by other researchers. But the information that their study contained is this: for 900 years, twice a day at minimum, the monks of Mont Saint-Michel stood in that choir and sang the canonical hours. The building carried the sound through its stone to every room, every crypt, every corridor. The sound went through the walls, it went through the floors, it entered the rock itself and was transmitted through the granite to the water below. 900 years of singing transmitted through stone and granite and water. The tidal flats of the bay surrounding Mont Saint-Michel are, at this moment, the same tidal flats that have been receiving this transmission since the 12th century. The water does not remember, but the pattern of the sound, the frequencies of the plainchant, the specific intervals of the office, the particular acoustic signature of this particular building carrying these particular voices. This pattern has been leaving the rock twice a day for 9 centuries and entering the water and the air and the granite and the wider world. Something went out. Whether anything received it is a different question, and not one that acoustic research is equipped to answer. There is a category of visitor to Mont Saint-Michel that the official statistics do not capture. The statistics count arrivals, 3 million per year. They do not track the percentage of those 3 million who have been here before, twice, 5 times, every year, for 30 years. They do not track the ones who left and could not stop thinking about it and came back. They do not track the ones who came as tourists and returned as pilgrims, or the ones who cannot explain to themselves or anyone else why they keep returning, but who keep returning anyway. These people exist in significant numbers. A man named Pierre, 63, a retired civil engineer from Bordeaux, has been to Mont Saint-Michel 14 times. He first came at 22 with a university friend on a road trip around Normandy. He spent 3 hours, took photographs, ate a mediocre crepe, and drove on. He came back 6 months later, alone. He has not entirely been able to explain why, including to himself. He has been back 12 more times in the 40 years since. He does not attend the offices. He is not religious. He says this simply and without apology. Raised Catholic, the faith fell away in his 20s and was not replaced. He does not light candles or pray or seek out the monks. He walks. He walks the ramparts. He walks the stairs from the base to the abbey. He walks the cloister. He walks the places that are permitted, and occasionally the places that are slightly less permitted. The roof walks accessible from certain abbey windows, the ledge above the north transept, where a person of moderate agility can stand and see the full sweep of the bay in both directions. He says, "I come because it resets something. I don't know what the something is. After I have been here for a day, I am different from when I arrived. Not better necessarily, just recalibrated. Like a compass that has been near a magnet and needs to be walked back to a place where it can find north again." He pauses, slightly embarrassed by the precision of his own metaphor. "The rock is north," he says. "My north, anyway. I don't know why." A young woman named Yasmin, 26, a graphic designer from London, came to Mont Saint-Michel for the first time in 2021, in the cautious reopening of the world after the pandemic. She had been in the apartment in East London for 14 months. Not unusually, everyone had been somewhere small for a long time. But the specific quality of her experience was a gradual and then sudden loss of scale. The apartment was 500 square feet. The street visible from the window was 30 feet wide. The sky was a strip between buildings. For 14 months, the largest thing she could see from any window was a plane passing overhead at 30,000 feet. When the world opened, she drove to France alone. She did not have a particular plan. She drove south from Calais on the first day and west toward the coast on the second, and found herself, on the third morning, crossing the bridge to Mont Saint-Michel. She has described that first morning in a piece of writing she shared, with evident uncertainty about sharing it, on a small personal website. "I crossed the bridge, and the bay was there on both sides, and I started crying before I even reached the gate. Not sad crying. The other kind. The kind that happens when something is too large for your body to process without leaking. I had forgotten that scale existed. 14 months in 500 square feet, and I had genuinely forgotten that the world was this size. The bay reminded me. The rock reminded me. I stood on the ramparts and I looked at the water and the sky, and I cried for about 20 minutes, and then I felt completely fine. Better than fine. I came back 3 months later. I will probably keep coming back. I don't know what this place is doing to me, but I think it is something necessary. Let us be exact about what endures. The granite of the rock endures, formed approximately 530 million years ago in the geological event that created the Armorican Massif. The granite of Mont Saint-Michel is among the oldest exposed rock in western France. It will outlast everything built on it by an interval too large to meaningfully contemplate. The tides endure. The tidal patterns of the bay are determined by the gravitational relationship between the Earth and the Moon, a relationship that has been stable for approximately 4 billion years and will remain stable for approximately 5 billion more, at which point the Sun will expand to a size that makes the question of tidal patterns somewhat academic. The building endures, with qualification. The current structure of Mont Saint-Michel Abbey represents approximately 1,200 years of construction, modification, destruction, rebuilding, restoration, and further modification. No single stone is in exactly the position it was placed in originally. Many stones have been replaced. The building that exists now is the building that existed then in the way that a river is the river. The same river, entirely different water, the identity residing in the continuity of the form rather than the persistence of the matter. The name endures. Mont Sancti-Michaelis in periculo maris, Mont Saint-Michel in peril of the sea. The medieval name, which acknowledged what the location meant, what the tides meant, what it cost to maintain a community in a place that the sea surrounded twice a day. The peril is less evident now than it was in the 10th century. The name remains. The Archangel endures, not the original. The original was a small statue, probably wood, placed in the first oratory by Bishop Aubert and lost to time and modification and the simple passage of centuries. Not the medieval stone carvings, though some of these remain in the Abbey Museum. The current Archangel, Frémier's 1897 bronze, restored and regilded in 1987, endures in the sense that any maintained object endures, by continuous attention, by the willingness of human beings to keep spending money and effort on its preservation. The hours endure. Lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. The canonical hours sung by the community at Mont Saint-Michel since 709. With interruptions, the 70-year silence of the prison years, the years of transition before the current community arrived. But the interruptions are the exception. The hours are the continuity. They are being sung right now, as this is being read, or they were sung within the last few hours, or they will be sung within the next few hours. They have not stopped. The pilgrims endure, changed beyond recognition in their clothing, their transportation, their reasons, their self-understanding. Unchanged in the fundamental fact of their movement, toward this rock, across this water, up this hill, to stand in this place for reasons they can articulate to varying degrees and feel completely. The monk will not give his name. He has been at Mont Saint-Michel for 7 years. He is in his 40s. Before the monastery, he was a doctor, internal medicine, a hospital in Paris. He will not explain the transition in any detail, not because the explanation is private, but because he has found that explanations of this particular transition are almost always less accurate than the silence that surrounds it. He agrees to walk the cloister with a visitor on an October afternoon when the tourist numbers have dropped to something manageable and the light is doing what October light does in Normandy, going gold early, going fast. He walks the cloister the way the monks have always walked the cloister, slowly in a consistent direction, the columns on the right, the open garden on the left, the sky visible through every arch. The visitor asks, "What does this place mean to you?" The monk is quiet for 2 full circuits of the cloister before he answers. "Mean is a difficult word," he says. "This place does not mean things to me the way a text means things. It does things, different things on different days. Today, this light, this October cold coming in from the bay, today it does one thing. In February, when the northwest wind is coming directly through those arches, it does something else. In August, when there are 3,000 people on this rock, and I am walking through a crowd of them to get from the sacristy to my cell, it does something I would not have predicted before I lived here." "What does it do in August?" the visitor asks. He considers this for another half circuit. It reminds me, he says, that this has always been what this place is. A place people come to, not a private place. It was never a private place. Even at the height of the enclosed monastic period, the pilgrims came. The abbots received them. The building was built to be seen by people who were not monks. The west facade, look at it. It was designed to be the first thing you see when you come up the hill. It was designed for the arriving pilgrim. Everything about the exterior of this building is a communication addressed to people who are outside it. He stops walking and looks up at the carved stone capital of the nearest column. A figure, an angel possibly, though the centuries have softened its features into ambiguity. We are not the point of this place, he says. The monks are not the point. We are the ones who keep the lights on. We are the ones who maintain the hours so that when people arrive, whoever they are, for whatever reason, the hours are here for them. The light is on. The door is open. The singing is happening. Whether they understand what the singing is or not seems to me a secondary question. The visitor asks, and what is the primary question? The monk looks at the visitor with the mildly amused patience of a man who has heard many questions and found most of them adjacent to each other. The primary question, he says, is whether they feel that they have arrived somewhere real. He pauses. Most of them do, he says. That is what this place seems to be for. On a specific evening in October, the date is unimportant, or rather the date is every October evening. It is always this evening. The high tide at Mont Saint-Michel arrives at 6:47. The sun sets at 7:12. In the 25 minutes between the high tide and the sunset, the light does something to the rock and the water that photographers travel from considerable distances to witness, and that no photograph, however skilled, entirely captures. The water at high tide reflects the evening sky. The sky in Normandy in October, at this particular hour, is a color that does not have a stable name. It moves between gold and gray and a very pale green and a pink that would seem sentimental in any other context, but here seems simply accurate. The rock rising from this colored water looks darker than it is by contrast, the granite almost black against the pale and mobile reflection, the abbey above it catching the last direct sunlight, the Archangel at the summit absolutely gold, the brightest point in the entire composition. The tourists on the ramparts at this hour, and there are always tourists on the ramparts at this hour, because word has gotten around, because the internet has made this specific 25 minutes famous. The tourists go quiet. Not all of them. Some of them are taking photographs with the focused intensity of people who know they have a narrow window and intend to use it. Some of them are narrating the scene in various languages for various video platforms. Some of the children are doing what children do, which is not particularly related to what is happening in the sky. But some of them, a portion, go quiet in the specific way of people who have encountered something that is temporarily larger than their capacity to process it. They stand at the rampart wall with the water below and the sky above, and the gold archangel at the top of everything, and they are quiet. This quiet has been happening on this rock for a very long time. Different people, different centuries, different reasons for coming, and different understandings of what they are experiencing. The same quiet. The bishop who built the first oratory died sometime in the early 8th century. His skull is in Avranches, in the treasury of the Gervais Basilica. It is in a reliquary, a container made of precious metal, worked into an elaborate case designed to preserve and honor the object within. The skull has a hole in it. The hole is, according to the tradition of the church, the mark of the Archangel's finger. The third appearance, the one where the instruction was delivered with sufficient force to constitute an argument that even a cautious bishop could not continue to refuse. The skull with its hole has been in Avranches for 13 centuries. It is brought out on certain feast days. People come to see it. It is, in its way, as improbable as everything else connected to this story. A hole in a skull of indeterminate origin, venerated for 13 centuries as the physical evidence of a conversation between a sleeping bishop and a being of light. Whether the hole is what the tradition says it is a question that forensic archaeology could address and has politely declined to do, on the grounds that the question of what made a hole in a skull 13 centuries ago is considerably less interesting to science than it is to faith. What the hole is evidence of, whatever its origin, is this. Something happened in Avranches in the year 708, something that caused a bishop to build an oratory on a granite rock in a tidal bay, something that initiated a chain of events. Building upon building, century upon century, the accumulated labor and faith and argument and art of generation after generation, that resulted 1,300 years later in a gold archangel standing at the top of a medieval spire on a rock in the Normandy coast, visible from 20 kilometers at sea, visited by 3 million people per year, its tidal hours still rung by a community of men who have chosen to organize their lives around the ringing of them. Whatever the something was, vision, dream, conviction, the simple human need to mark a significant place with a significant structure, its consequences are real and measurable and continue to accumulate. Aubert, if returned to the world and transported to the current Mont Saint-Michel, would be astonished, not by the size of the building, though he would be astonished by the size of the building, not by the numbers of pilgrims, though 3 million per year would exceed any medieval projection. He would be astonished by the persistence of the thing, that it is still here, that it is still being maintained, that human beings, in numbers that dwarf everything his century could have imagined, are still crossing the bay, in rubber boots and waterproof jackets, in tour buses and private cars, with smartphones and guidebooks and audio guides and the vague, compelling sense that this is somewhere they should be. To stand on this rock and look at the gold figure at the top of it and feel something that they cannot entirely name. He might recognize the feeling. He felt it first. This is not the last tide. There is no last tide within any time scale that matters to the human beings who build things and maintain them and visit them and write about them and remember them. The tides at Mont Saint-Michel will continue for longer than the human species will exist to observe them. The granite will outlast the building. The bay will outlast everything that has been placed in it or built beside it. But there is a tide that is happening right now. At this specific moment, whatever moment this is being read, whatever hour, whatever season, whatever century, if this writing persists that long, the tide at Mont Saint-Michel is either coming in or going out, or standing at its brief pause at the highest or lowest point before reversing. The Archangel is standing at the top of his spire. The monks are in some part of their daily cycle, sleeping, praying, eating, maintaining the heating system, walking the cloister, crossing through the tourist crowds with the practiced fluency of people who have made their peace with the situation. Someone is crossing the bay, not necessarily on foot, perhaps on the bridge, in a car, in the early morning quiet before the tourist buses arrive, perhaps on foot, with a guide, pressing the wooden pole into the sand before each step, perhaps alone, as Marie-Louise crosses it every October, the footprints behind her the only marks on the entire expanse. Someone is arriving at the gate. Someone is climbing the Grande Rue, past the crepe shops and the souvenir stalls, and the smell of Norman cider, and the general warm noise of commerce. Someone is entering the abbey for the first time and stopping just inside the door, because the scale of the interior is different from what they expected, larger, older, more present, and they need a moment before they can move forward. Someone is standing in the cloister looking up at a carved stone capital, trying to make out what figure has been worn by 7 centuries of sea air into this smooth, almost human, almost divine ambiguity. Someone is on the ramparts watching the tide come in and going quiet in the specific way that this place has been producing quietness in human beings for 1,300 years. Someone is at Vespers, sitting at the back of the nave, not knowing the words, listening anyway. Someone is looking at the floor. The floor is old, before us old. And the stone that has absorbed 900 years of singing is carrying the sound right now, through its granite and its mortar and its centuries, to the water below and the bay around it and the sky above, and whoever has enough quiet inside them to receive it. The tide is coming in. The Archangel stands. The monks sing. The pilgrims come. This is what endures, not the reasons, not the explanations, not the theology or the history, or the 14 euros, or the souvenir bronze archangels in 4 sizes, or the omelets, or the audio guides. The coming, the crossing, the arrival, the standing in a place that has been waiting without urgency, without judgment, for exactly this, for you, whoever you are, for this specific hour of your specific life, and the feeling when you arrive that the place already knew you were coming, that it has always known, that this is what it was built for,